everyone, I'm Lindsay Rennick-Mayer with Global Wildlife Conservation, and I am here today with Jeremy Hance, who is a reporter who recently wrote a story for Mongabay about his trip to Vietnam to try to get a glimpse of the Silver-backed Chevrotain. And as you know, the Chevrotain is the first mammal rediscovery from GWC's top 25 most wanted lost species. So it had been lost for nearly 30 years, and when Jeremy took this trip over the summer, he knew that we had the first ever camera trap photos of the animal, but he wanted to see it for himself. So you can read his great story and see the video that they developed on mongabay.com. So today we're going to be asking Jeremy the questions that you have submitted. And before we get to that, though, I wanted first to acknowledge our partners on this expedition. So that's the Southern Institute of Ecology and Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research. And I also wanted to mention that you can help us save the Chevrotain. You can donate today so that we can get additional camera traps to look for the Chevrotain. We need to know how many are out there, how many populations are out there, and where they are. And by doing this survey, we can develop the best conservation action plan with our partners. So just text SILVER, that's SILVER, to 50155 to make a donation. Okay, so let's get started. Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about this.
Yeah, so first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background in journalism?
Sure. So I've been an environmental journalist now for about 10 years, and I got my start at Mongabay, and then I went freelance about 3-4 years ago, but I'm still working a lot with Mongabay, and I have a column on Mongabay right now called Saving Life on Earth, Words on the Wild, and that column was sort of what spurred this trip. It was an idea that we had to go and see if we could see the lost species that the scientists had already discovered in person.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about Mongabay. What kinds of stories can people read there?
Yeah, Mongabay. So really, if you're interested in the environment, if you're interested in oceans, if you're interested in climate change, if you're interested especially in rainforests, Mongabay is I think, probably the best site in the world when it comes to rainforests, tropical forests, and wildlife. And that's where, like I said, I got my start there, so it really infused my love of those regions. But it's a really wonderful site with lots of different chapters, hundreds of journalists writing for them around the world, so you're getting really local, contextual, serious reporting. So it's a real joy to be able to write for them whenever I get the chance.
Yeah, it's certainly one of our favorite news sources for environmental news. That's
yeah,
great.
And it's getting bigger and bigger every year. It's so fun to see.
Fantastic. Okay, well, let's move on now to some of these questions from our followers. So the first question we got in was, what drew you to the Silver-backed Chevrotain in particular? Why did you want to see this lost species?
Sure. So, a part of it as a journalist is really what works practically. You find a story and you kind of have to fit it around your schedule and what works. And I was already going to be in Asia, so that's part of it. But the real story is that I love weird animals. I love the stranger, the weirder, the more evolutionarily distinct. I just have an affinity for strange creatures. And so when GWC put out this list of the 25 most wanted lost species, it really grabbed my imagination. So I've been following, GWC's sort of searches for different species and been communicating with the staff there. And, when this species was rediscovered, it was a really exciting moment. And it sort of propelled me to say, well, it's not often that a journalist gets to go to the field to look for something that has only been seen by camera trap. So I thought, well, this will make an interesting story. Let me see if I can go to Vietnam, go to this sort of remote area where the small village and just try and find this animal. And that's really what we did. And it turned into quite an adventure. And so that was part of the desire, is just to go and find and see. The more unique, the stranger, the better. And I don't know what that says about me as a human being or a journalist, but I really love those kind of wildlife stories, and I'm really attracted to that.
And this is a deer-like species, right? That's about the size of a soccer ball or a rabbit. It's got fangs. It appears to walk on its tippy toes. So it is kind of a little bit whimsical.
Yes, it's a really bizarre animal. And I think one of the things I learned in the research is that, we call it a mouse deer, but it's neither a mouse nor a deer. It's an ungulate, so it's related to deer. But it's really, Chevrotains are their completely own thing. And scientists now think that their evolution goes back probably like 50 million years to just after the dinosaurs. They're probably very similar to some of the early mammals that evolved. And a number of Chevrotain species, probably not the one we were looking for, are very adaptable in water. So they'll jump in the water to hide from predators. And there are some scientists who think that behavior and their ability to stay underwater for long periods may have allowed them to eventually evolve into things like whales, dolphins, hippos. So they're this weird throwback animal, and I have I have this weird obsession with strange animals, especially ones that are distinct and unique and evolutionarily just bizarre. And so to get a chance to try and see a Chevrotain, especially this newfound species with this beautiful silverback, was just something I couldn't pass up.
Yeah, and as I had mentioned to you earlier, it's not often that I learn something new about the species that we're already working on, but I had no idea that they were good swimmers and that there's sort of that evolutionary history there. So that was really interesting from your story.
Yeah, and I had seen a lesser Chevrotain when I was in Borneo like 10 years ago, and I just assumed it was a tiny deer, like a road deer in Europe or something. But it's really not. So I think that was one of the fun things about working on this story is when you write about strange animals, you always find out these weird things that isn't also often widely reported because I got the chance to really go in depth, whereas a lot of journalists don't get that chance. And so that was a really exciting part about this.
Yeah, and one of the questions that we had gotten was what was your favorite moment of the trip? And I'm wondering if you can sort of, as you enter that, set up for us, what was it like to be in the field? What did that adventure look like?
Sure. So it was really interesting. I'd never been to Vietnam, so I go to this town. I flew into a certain part of southern Vietnam, and then I get a taxi, and they're like, "Where do you want to go?" And I'm like, I tell them, and they're like, "What?" When they look it up on their GPS, they're like, "Okay." And like it's like an hour-long drive in this taxi, and I can tell this guy's like he thought he was going to have a 10-minute drive for me to a more touristed area. So that's always an interesting thing. And just being in Vietnam, being in a Vietnamese village where there's literally no foreigner, I didn't see any other Westerners while I was there. And so like I'd see people like having a big speaker sitting out, and they'd be drinking beer, and they'd wave to me, and I'd like say, "Come on over," and I'd be like, So there's all that kind of cultural components that were sort of funny and interesting, and one of the things I love about travel. But I think really the best part about the trip was the ability to go out. We went out at night to look for the animal because the animal is most active in the early dawn, and none of us wanted to get up early, or at dusk, just after dark.
Yeah.
And so we would go out and we would just go to these are tropical forests, but they're very dry forests, and so they're very short, and there's just vines and rocks everywhere, and you're just sort of scrabbling through. Making way too much noise trying to find this animal. And so I think that, at the time, that was the really difficult part of the trip, right? Like I would come back soaked in sweat, you'd be cursing as you'd get thorns in you. But after, when you come home and you get some break from it, those are the moments that really stick out. It's sitting there on a rock in the night after sort of trying to find this animal with an indigenous hunter who's smoking his cigarette and my wildlife guide, and just being like, wow, this was amazing and beautiful. So that's really what stuck out the most for me.
And you had started your story by talking about sort of chasing a ghost, and I wonder if sort of sitting there in the middle of the night in this remote area, if it truly did feel like you were ghost hunting, ghost watching.
Yeah, it did. And I went to Vietnam knowing that it was going to be very unlikely that we were going to see this animal. But I went because I wanted to see where the animal was, and I wanted to see what the challenges were in saving it. I obviously it would have been great if we had seen it. Spoiler alert: I did not personally see it. Shocking. So we went to, I went for that purpose, but yeah, I did feel like I was chasing in ghosts, and in some ways, I almost feel like that's a good metaphor for lost species. I knew it was out there. I've since been able to see, obviously, the camera trap footage and the pictures and stuff, and that was so cool to be able to see it after the trip. So I knew it was there, but you are kind of chasing an animal that is clearly elusive, ghost-like. And I think in some ways that's a good metaphor for thinking about just how rare and fragile this species and a lot of species in Southeast Asia are. A lot of them are still there, but the populations are small. They're under incredible duress. And this animal in particular it's very good at running away and hiding. And it's a very skittish, small prey animal. So it did feel like that. It felt like an interesting metaphor for the story as a whole.
Yeah, I really love that, and it reminds me a lot of with the saola, so this antelope-like species that lives in the Annamites as well, and they call it the Asian unicorn. So it does have sort of that supernatural kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really true of a lot of these rare animals is they almost take on that mythic quality because the same thing with the Sumatran rhino, which I write a lot about as well, there's this sense that if you actually saw one of these things in the wild, it should be a mystical experience because this animal is so shy, so retiring, so rare.
Yes.
And I've had chances to see animals like that. On this particular journey, we did not succeed, but it was an adventure nonetheless.
And so what was the most challenging part? I know you had written about pulling a thorn out of your head.
Yeah, I had a thorn stuck in my head at one point. You just kind of, you don't even realize because your adrenaline's running. I think honestly the most challenging part though was I did get sick near the end of the trip. Common thing that happens when you're going to any new country with new cuisine, different. So I did get a little sick and I had to miss the snorkeling. I wanted to go snorkeling in this beautiful remote area I was in. So I had to miss that. So I had one day that was a little bit difficult. But other than that, honestly, the trip was a really success. I felt like even though we didn't see the animal, it was a real success. Okay. And I think my wildlife guide, who was amazing, and everyone involved felt that way too.
And why do you think it's so important to share these stories of rediscovery and also just the stories of these sort of lesser known, almost forgotten species?
Well, I think we underestimate just how much this can capture the public's attention.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting, and I think we need those hopeful stories. We need to realize that while things look grim right now for our world in terms of climate change, in terms of mass extinction, it doesn't mean that everything is gone. It doesn't mean that there isn't things worth saving. There's so much worth saving. But I also think that it's important in the sense that I think it can lead to the larger issues of, we have a crisis in Southeast Asia. We have a crisis of snaring, of poaching, of overhunting, of wildlife trade that we're the heart of the mass extinction crisis right now is literally where I was in Southeast Asia. It's Vietnam, it's Laos, it's Indonesia, it's Malaysia. It's those countries that are experiencing this rapid decline of anything larger than a mouse. And so I feel like this is maybe a bridge to sort of reach readers that may not always, may not read the environment section a lot to sort of understand what some of these things are going on and what's at stake. Yeah. So it's both hopeful, but it's also, I think, a teaching moment, hopefully.
Yeah, and one of the questions that we had received gets sort of to this in your story, and that is you had traveled with individuals who have hunted this species, and that's in part how you were able to get around. So how did you feel about that, knowing that, overhunting is one of the potential major threats to this species?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard, but at the same time, so my wildlife guide was able to get in touch with an ethnic group that lives sort of more in the mountains and the hills, and they do hunt them. One of the guys had hunted 3 the week before. Yeah, and on the one hand, as a journalist, it's my job to sort of step back, and I'm not law enforcement. What they are doing is illegal. I mean, they're hunting in a protected area. But on the other hand, what made it, I think, what shows the complexity of this is they have been hunting this species probably for hundreds to thousands of years. Yeah. These people, the local people that live in the area. At least the people that we met and talked to, at least what they told us is they are not hunting for any kind of commercial trade. These animals are not being shipped to Hanoi, for example. So they are hunting just to feed their family and to put meat on the table, right? Is it still okay? I think that's the question that conservationists have to ask. That we have to find out how many of these animals are left, and we have to find out where they are, and we then need to add new protections. But I think instead of sort of like condemning the people that I was with or saying you need to be locked up, that kind of that knee-jerk reaction, it's really more about then going and working with those communities and saying, hey, this animal that you've been hunting forever, we know that you hunted, your grandfather hunted it, your great, we need to talk about how that is done, if that can still be done, and if it's not done, there needs to be some kind of compromise and recompense made, where maybe some of them could work as rangers, or maybe some of the people, maybe there's some other meat that could be looked at. So that's the challenge. And also the Silver-backed Chevrotain, it's very similar in some ways to the lesser mouse deer, which is also hunted. So there's a lot of they're not going out there knowing that this is necessarily a potentially critically endangered species. They're going out there doing something that they've been doing for generations. And so on the one hand, I knew this going in. I've been writing about conservation long enough to know how complicated it is, and that it's not a black and white. It's a messy, complicated thing. But it was really, I think that was the most interesting part of the story for me, was being able to go spend time with the local hunters. And the only reason we got to even get close, and one of the hunters did see an animal, did see a pregnant animal. And we made very clear, let me also make this clear, is that we made very clear that we were not there to hunt them that night.
Right, okay.
I don't think that hunter would have, they used slingshots to kill them, which is also just an amazing feat of human ingenuity. But I don't think that the hunter would have killed the pregnant animal anyway.
Yeah.
But we also made very clear that they were, no one was going to kill an animal that night.
Yep.
But I think it was a great moment for them to see that there was interest in this animal outside, and for us to have that conversation. And I don't imagine that the hunting will abate to any great extent. I imagine that they will continue to hunt as they have done. I think the question is, what's sort of the next step for the conservation scientists and conservationists, and for the government, and how to deal with this in a way that will hopefully protect the animal, but also work with local communities that actually know the animal, know more about it. I mean, they knew it was there for the 30 years that it's been missing.
Right.
So, they are the people to talk to if you want to find out about this animal.
Yeah, and that's, partly for GWC and our Search for Lost Species. When we say that a species is lost, it means it's lost to science, so there's no scientific records. But in a lot of these cases, the locals do know that the species is there, and they are the reason that we're able to find it. Because, especially in this case, our scientists were in the field doing interviews with locals, and they had heard from the locals that, yes, they had seen some Chevrotains with a silver flank, and so they were able to figure out exactly where they wanted to put the camera traps that ended up getting these pictures. So a lot of times, the locals are the very people that we partner with to make these rediscoveries, and then also to actually put conservation measures in place. Yeah. So I think that's a really important point.
And I think that's so important, in that you need that local buy-in, that local compromise, and working with locals in order to protect species, especially species that are found in like 1 or 2 regions. Like that has to be done. And so it was. I genuinely really enjoyed being with these men and learning about their experiences with this animal. So.
And did you, while you were there, get a sense of how many may be left?
No, I don't think anyone knows yet. I think what's amazing is that I was out there for 2 nights, and we did one of the people on the trip, one of the hunters did see one. Which is incredible considering how much noise we were all making. I mean, not the hunters; they were silent as cats. But myself, I sounded like a grizzly bear, locked in a cage. And I think what's really heartening is that when they put the camera traps where the locals said, they caught a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
So I think what the scientists can probably say is that at least in this small area, really next to this one village, there is a somewhat abundant population. There are animals there, and they're not hard to find if you know where you're looking.
Yeah.
I think the bigger question now is, are there populations in other places?
Yeah.
And how big are those? And I think that information, once GWC and partners are able to kind of figure that out, that will feed into a lot of, okay, where do we go from here?
Yep. Yeah, and I think we got questions too about, like, you didn't see one, but you were so close to seeing one, right? There was a pregnant one, a pregnant Chevrotain that some of the folks you were with saw. So how did that feel to get so close to seeing one? And you mentioned this before, but was it worth it to still go?
I mean, it felt a little. ironic, but it also just at that point my brain was not like I was just so tired and panting and trying to keep up that my brain was not focused on. I was like, all right, whatever, And also, so what we were doing is we had two different groups, and they were hooting back and forth the hunters, and so we heard the hooting get more energetic, which was a sign, oh, the animal's there. And then you're just rushing towards the hooting, but you're hitting branches and you're slipping and you're falling and you're trying not to curse. And at that point, I was pretty clear in my head. I'm like, I'm not going to actually see it by the time I get there, and that's what happened. Yeah. So it wasn't a surprise. Was the trip worth it? It was 100% worth it. Yeah. I went there to try and just see the habitat and the threats, and I got to see all that. I got to have this amazing experience. I didn't see the animal, but in some ways that was almost superfluous. And I think, yes, it would have been amazing to have seen it, but it would have also been literally 2 seconds of like this shadow, which again goes back to kind of it being a ghost. So, I've done this enough, and I've done enough wildlife traveling that any experience, anytime you see wildlife, it's an honor, it's wonderful, but you are never owed that experience. You don't go on an African safari. Some people do, unfortunately, and they think they are owed to see a lion or to see an elephant. No. You are honored and graced by its presence if you happen to see it. So I always go in with that mentality, and I knew that this was like a long shot. But I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, and not seeing it in some ways leaves that mystery within me, and that's an okay experience to have. That was not a bad. I didn't feel at all disappointed. It almost felt more apt than seeing it in some ways. So.
And you were also still able to come home with such a rich story just about the adventure and how.
Yes, it was. And that's what was fun about it is, a lot of times when I write about animals, you write from your desk. Yeah. You don't actually get to see the location. You don't get to have an adventure or story. So when the chance came to do this, I thought, well, this will be it. If nothing else, this will be hopefully a good story to tell. And that was the goal, was to give this rediscovery a little extra flavor and adventure and a little sense of mystery that it can't be captured from just a regular press release, right, or just a regular story. And so I think I love that kind of journalism, and it's really hard to produce that kind of journalism because it obviously costs money. But I think if we could do more of that kind of journalism, I think we could get more people interested in these stories.
Yeah, it really brings it to life, for sure.
Yeah, it does. And I think it also just shows what these conservationists have to go through to try and find these species, protect these species. I was there for 2 days, and by the end of it, I was like, all right, I'm going back to the city now. I was exhausted. And conservationists do a lot harder work, and I'm always amazed at what they can pull off.
Yeah, one of our followers had asked, what now moving forward, what are the conservation measures, both that have been implemented, while we do these other surveys, and then also sort of what is the more comprehensive plan. And so what is your sense of that from your research?
Sure. So I think, so what I've learned from GWC and others is that there are, this information was given to the park staff, right, that this animal is there, and that anti-poaching patrols have been upped, that there are more boots on the ground, basically kind of keeping an eye out, which is good and necessary. I think the complicated thing is that, there is not protected area on the planet in any rich country even where the funding is adequate to the challenge. And especially in places like Southeast Asia and in developing countries, often the funding is not there. The training is not there. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to protecting these species on the ground. And so I don't think we should be at all ambivalent or just say, okay, done is done. And I think from what I understand from GWC is the next step is to really try and find out, okay, are these animals in other places? And then once we have a better sense of the global population of how many are there, then we can start talking about, okay, what are some other measures that need to be put in place? But I think what people don't understand is all of that takes commitment and all that takes money. And so I think to your point earlier about donating, donating can help save this species from extinction because it's not going to get saved without funding, and the Vietnamese government at this point and other governments simply don't put the resources into that. And hopefully that changes down the road. But right now, these animals are on the edge, and it's not just this animal. It's all when I was there, we were looking for a kind of duke, a type of monkey, and there was a very small population that had almost been wiped out by poachers 10 years ago, and we didn't get to see them because they were so skittish, for good reason. But again, this kind of protection helps other species that are in the area as well. So I think that's the way moving forward. Hopefully this stuff can happen quickly, and hopefully there can be funding for it to allow this species to safeguard. But that's really where the metal meets the rubber, as it were, for that to happen.
And so based on all of that, how are you feeling? Are you feeling hopeful for the future of this species and the others that share its home in the Annamites?
Yeah, I mean, this is the $1 million question, right? So if you look at realistically what's happening on our planet with mass extinction, with climate change, with environmental loss, and with, I would say, an ongoing government ambivalence towards these issues, it's hard to feel hopeful about anything. Realistically, it's hard to have optimism. Yeah. But if we don't have hope, I always come back to, well, what's the point? Yeah. I have a 8-year-old daughter, and I want her to inherit a world that is beautiful and wonderful and wild. And so I continue to do this job, even though it's emotionally and psychologically difficult, for her sake and for other, children growing up in this world that I think we have screwed up in many ways. We've screwed up, but it's time now, I think. So I do have hope, and I do, I think as a journalist, you try and find those just as a human being, you try and find glimmers of hope to hang on to. There are some movements going on. There are some exciting things happening. I think none of it's quick enough and none of it's fast enough to yet that I want it to be. Yeah. I'm impatient. Yeah. But at the other hand, I do think that what we are looking at in our current society is that we really need a values and cultural change. We need to stop thinking that the only thing that matters is economic growth, right? We need to start thinking that what really in our future age is going to matter much more than sort of wealth is going to be a stable climate and a stable ecosystem biosphere. So I think that we need to have that consciousness change, that value change. And if we can do that, then I have lots of hope for this species. This species, at least where we were, is still there. It's holding on. And that is so exciting. Yeah. So, every day is a new chance to make better choices and to vote in better leaders. Mm-hmm. Every day is a chance for that. And so I do have hope, but I'm not necessarily optimistic, if that's, mm-hmm. I mean, it's such a difficult question to answer, and I get it all the time, yeah. And I always go around and around. So, but I will say to people that don't get ambivalent, right? Yeah. Care, yeah. Have passion. Your actions do matter, and you can get involved. And even just sharing the news about the species is one way to make a little bit of difference and to learn a little bit about it yourself. But I think if we can just have this cultural change, that we can leave our children a much wilder, better, safer, more ecologically and climate secure world. So I'm hoping for that. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point that the stories that you're telling, the stories that GWC are trying to tell, are very critical in helping people understand why the environment matters, why we need to protect it, and why we need sort of this transformative change in society.
Yeah, so I think exactly. And I think, if anything can be hopeful, it's finding a tiny rabbit-sized mammal, ancient mammal, still surviving in this one forest in remote Vietnam. That's very close to people. It's not like it wasn't. I mean, believe me, when we were there, you could look from the animal's habitat down to the village. You could see the lights. So this animal has hung on. I mean, the one thing that people, I think, I think when people get too doom and gloom, they forget just how resilient nature can be. Yeah. Yes, we're going to lose things. Yes, it's going to be a challenge. But humans are resilient, and nature is resilient. And if we could just get our minds around that, this is the fight for our generation and our age, I think we could really make a beautiful world.
Yeah, I love that. Well, the other question that I just wanted to address that we got from one of our followers was about whether we are expecting to rediscover additional species. And I'm going to answer that just by saying that you should tune in to GWC's social media over the next few months for some more exciting announcements along these lines. And you can see our full list of our 25 most wanted lost species at globalwildlife.org. And then also just, again, a reminder, to help us conserve the lost and found silver-backed Chevrotain. You can do so by texting Silver, SILVER, to 50155 to give today. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your story. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage, if anyone's looking for a fun, very interesting, wonderful place to visit, Vietnam is beautiful and worth it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And again, if you want to read Jeremy's full story and see his video, it's at Mongabay.com. Thanks so much.